Hello, all you Crystal Cocoon listeners out there. We are here for another exciting show. And today's topic, we're going to be discussing the nature of reality itself. And I am your host, Brandon, and
Hannaneel.
I'm Jesse.
And, okay, so the nature of reality is something kind of we discuss among ourselves a lot. And it's something that a lot of people kind of hear little tidbits on and kind of pass over. The fact is there's a lot of information out there, but the information isn't often, all the little pieces aren't put together too often. When you start to assimilate all the data out there from the different studies, from the different experiments, and a wide array of topics, it really begins to paint a different picture and paint a whole new paradigm. And it really changes things, not only the way you do your work, if you're doing energy work, but just generally the way you look at life itself, how you approach life, and your interactions with life changes. So,
I would totally agree with you.
Me too. Well, I think it's interesting when we talk about the nature of reality because, like I said in our first podcast, I thought everyone saw reality exactly the same. And I went along with that assumption for, decades of my life, assuming, very much an assumption on my part, that everyone perceives reality the same. And once I finally started asking some deeper questions and actually researching a little bit more, I realized that was a very false assumption and really frankly, illogical. And so when we start looking at things like quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and we start talking about people like Tesla, who talked about sound and vibration, and these are people who've been doing this kind of work for a long time, and these are names that we keep hearing a lot, especially nowadays, when more people are questioning, what is the nature of reality?
I love how Tesla is coming back right now, and his research and his thought processes and his approach to problem solving. I'm thrilled to see it back in popular culture. Well, actually, in popular culture, I should say, rather than back in.
It's nice to know that scientists can be cool again. Mm-hmm. And science is very much a cool aspect of when we talk about spirituality, that there is a science and a very real rational point of view. And that's kind of what I think we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Mm-hmm. Those are the more scientific aspects of reality and kind of, what we do know and what is still kind of supposition.
Mm-hmm. For me, I actually, I had the form, for me, I went through it from the science end first. I was really fascinated by, astrophysics and quantum theories and string theory. I always was watching and reading and researching about that. From a young age, I was curious about that. And I would try to fit that in with the popular model and understanding. And I had a lot of confusion when I would do that, but I couldn't, I was missing that piece until I started doing energy work and talking with guides and going, oh, that's what it is. That's the missing piece is that energetic consciousness. And I think that's really, really at the root of reality, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about, are these different kinds of consciousnesses that are not expressing in a physical reality as far as we understand that. So one of the questions that I thought was really we've all kind of talked about what we view as our nature of reality, but one of the concepts that really came to me in the very beginning of starting to understand it was that concept of scarcity versus plenty that you start to realize when how we operate as humans in a real scarce mentality that, I don't have enough money, I might not have enough food, I'm not loved enough, all of these things. And when you go into the energetics, you realize there's plenty there. And you think, I shouldn't pull too much energy for myself or for this thing. So I was curious, did that impact you guys as you started exploring energy work?
Well, for me, I think it was an aspect of when I started doing energy work, but it wasn't something that really hit me right away. because I believe that some of that is based in a belief system, and those are really individual kind of beliefs where we lack, whether that's, financially, it's in the love department, if it's in our worth, how we see ourselves. And that just gets replayed, patterned out into a very physical reality. We have created a society and a culture where lack versus abundance is something we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Who has more, who has less, and a lot of judgments about that. What does that mean about who you are? For me, what kind of, I remember this moment really, really vividly. I had been doing some research on myself, is trying to figure out what is all this energy that I can sense. What does it mean to be empathic? And it kind of came along the cymatics, which is being able to see sound in an actual physical way, where they will put sand on top of speaker, reverberation plates.
I love those experiments.
Yeah, so you can actually see different notes. You can see how they make really cool and awesome, intricate patterns. So I started having this correlation kind of happen in my head with sound, frequency, vibration, energy, quantum mechanics. So then I think my head kind of exploded a little bit. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of what I do when I'm moving energy and when I'm sensing people. I'm sensing a vibration, a frequency that I can't see. So for me, that was this just sort of popped my noggin kind of thing, and realizing, oh, there's so much more to reality than I have ever considered. And that for me was a real sort of, oh, okay, reality is different than what I thought.
I actually think I had the same introduction when I started looking into things, because it was much the same. I was having experiences that I couldn't explain. And knowing that other people I knew of more of the scientific nature and in the science world, they were like, no, that's impossible. That doesn't happen. No, it's in your head. I'm like, no. These things happen. I know these things happen. So I started looking into quantum mechanics and seeing how I could explain certain phenomena that I was experiencing. And that, I think that was one of the first things I came across, the cymatics, looking at and then reading different research papers and different physics explanations on sound, and how everything has a vibration, and every vibration is a sound, and every sound has a geometry to it, where the intersections of the waves occur, and you have these little nodes. And so I thought that was really interesting, and it really changed my perspective on the importance of structure, with the physical structure and the energetic structure, and how frequency itself can change and entrain other solid material. And then you started looking over mind over matter, and how that might occur. You bombard a certain substance with another frequency, and you entrain that substance to this new frequency, and looking at how that occurs on a genetic level and a physical level for a person. And then just kind of spiraled from there into all these different experiments, for the mind over matter experiments at Pear Labs, where they were actually able to affect random number generators with their mind, and looking more into the specifics of that, of how if they didn't actually look at the results, then they can change the results even after the recording happened. If they looked at the results, then they couldn't change anything. It was hardly could do anything at all. And I thought that was fascinating. And it kind of leads into the observation of reality makes it so. And more has come out lately on that, backing up the notion that it's the very observation of reality, very observation of anything through our consciousness that makes it so. And you can kind of philosophically confirm that by thinking about trying to think of something that doesn't exist. You can't think of something that doesn't exist. Well, why is that? Because everything that you can think of is some version of another thing that already exists. And then when you combine what you know, that's how new things are created. Nothing really is new, totally new, created ever, because it has to be in existence in order for us to draw from it from someplace.
I love, one of the things that I love when we start talking about this topic is how sound is really one of the binding fundamental principles that we all take away from our research. I know when I first started doing energy work, I also started studying music theory and learning piano and learning to play guitar and sing. And I was I was getting a lesson on where did scales come from in music, and where did the notes and the system of music come from. And Bach is really who created the scale system, and he called it scales because he was a mountaineer, and he used to take his sons hiking every weekend, and you'd have to scale the mountain one step at a time. And while he would be hiking, he would be thinking, how do I create a system by which I can explain music to everyone? Because before that, there was no written music. It was taught in churches, and it was considered to be a very holy, sacred thing, sounds and music. And that's something that you couldn't access as an everyday person. If you wanted to hear music, you had to go to the churches, or you could sometimes hear the lutists playing, and they would be either trained through the churches or they would have their own system. But there was no written record of the music up until that point. So what he found was that there was a root note that was like this secure, stable, strong note that really anchored a piece, and he called that C. And he called it root C. Well, as when I started learning about the chakra system and using sounds to realign and reorganize your chakra system into more optimum frequencies, well, that's what our root chakra is tuned to the note of C. Then we continue up the body, and each chakra is one note at a time, C, D, E, and so on up until you get to your high crown, which is back to the C, and I thought that was fascinating.
Totally. There's also, you're absolutely right. There is stuff still coming out now about some of the Gregorian chants that were put together, the self-radio frequencies, which talk about how the church really utilized frequency in a way to actually create a level of spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
And it was something that had been passed down through the church lineages. And so that is something that if you even just Google self-radio frequency, you can find a lot of YouTubes on meditations, things like that. And of course, there are different scales. So depending on what you want to do, if there's transformation, they have one for redoing your DNA cellular levels. There's one that works specifically on your heart. So that's, again, sound is one of those really amazing things. When we talk about energy, we hear sound, but what does it feel like? Well, we've all stood maybe next to a very large bass during a loud rock concert and can feel those reverberations move through our body acoustically. Well, that's no different than how the shamans used to use drumming and rattling as a way of moving energy through the body. So very much an interesting facet of old techniques, ancient ways of doing things that we found a really scientific basis for in today.
There's actually Michael Tellinger does a presentation that I found really fascinating. It's kind of long, but he really takes all these concepts and pulls them together and has a lot of different resources that he draws from. And one of the things that he talks about is how, I forget the gentleman's name who built the Coral Castle in Florida. He would take...
Scullin.
Yeah. And he had this secret way of unloading the blocks of coral that were many tons, that some of them were multiple tons in weight. And he would make the truck come, and then the drivers had to leave the truck there. And he would unload by himself, this old man, this giant block of coral. And he built this whole castle by himself.
There was several blocks of coral. So it was like a whole flatbed trailer full of these like several ton blocks that they would have had a crane to lift. And he did it all by himself. And it was using frequencies and these radio transmitters. And he modified them in certain ways and wrapped the coil around it. And nobody knows exactly how he did it. But it was just, that's kind of what they got from him. So they don't really know exactly how, because he never divulged his secrets.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
There's another gentleman in Australia who created a device that you just put it into a cup of coffee or water or whatever, and with sound, it instantly causes the water to start boiling. and he didn't want to share his secret. And that's kind of part of, we touched on this earlier, the idea of ownership of ideas. And, he'd never shared it with anybody, and he's died, and it didn't catch on before it became popular. So,
well, it sounds to me, I've never heard actually that one. That's really interesting. But it sounds to me similarly to Witt's Ministries. They're big into free energy stuff, and they also use vibrations and sound based on some of John Keely and Tesla's work. Mm. And so they created a water heater that's spherical, and they turn it on, and then just over a minute, I think, definitely under 2 minutes, but it got the water up to 225 degrees.
Wow.
Using 9 volts of power from a little square 9-volt battery.
That's amazing.
And yeah, so it's amazing how much technology is out there and how much we could actually be further ahead if you let go of the need to own ideas. But our whole society is set up that way. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem. Like you can't get anywhere if you don't keep it for yourself, because somebody else is going to come up and claim it and own it. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful. And then how do you even have to have a lot of money to sit there and prevent somebody else from doing that?
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's kind of like this catch-22 thing where everybody has to feel like they own these certain ideas, and it's really kept us way further behind than we could be.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we talk about like the nature of reality, and we've talked about sound, there's all sorts of other vibrational expressions. That sound is just one of them that impact us. There's light energy. There's, Brandon, you want to name a few others? Put you on the spot.
Well, there's light energy. There's scalar waves and frequencies that permeate everything. I happen to think that the foundation. Well, this kind of goes into where I wanted to lead in the talk eventually, but the foundation of our universe is that of a certain scalar wave frequencies that you would have yet to identify. And it has to be that way because it keeps in terms of parallel realities and parallel universes, one reality from the next. And intuitively, I've been shown that every universe is kept from the next, and it looks like this sea foam of little bubbles next to each other. And so you have to think about what keeps this bubble together. It has to be some sort of foundational frequency that sets it apart, like a phase shift out from the other one. And then not only that, in the same universe, you also got parallel dimensions. So different dimensions exist within the same universe. So you've got
bubbles within bubbles.
Bubbles within bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
You've got little nexus points that spring out to infinity. And then even from those, you got new nexus points. So at every given instant in time and space, you have a nexus point from which another infinite number of possibilities exists. So therefore, this is like the mathematics of infinity. Mm-hmm. There's infinite numbers within infinite numbers of possibilities that exist.
I think you made my head hurt. Just saying. Like, again, when we start talking about the vastness of the universe, it's one of those conceptual things that my mind just goes going, whoa. Mm-hmm. Whoa.
Yeah.
Because I know that these, I know that they're true. At the same time, on a human level, how do we understand that on a day-to-day level about the nature of our reality?
Like, how does that impact us? How can we translate that into... Well, that's something that we, when we talk about ourselves as being strands of expression, that's how I refer to myself as being, as a strand of expression. And this strand is called Jesse, in this point in time. And we've been discussing, when you start to work on yourself and you start to heal yourself, what are you actually doing? Well, you're adjusting your frequency. You're adjusting your expression. And when you adjust your frequency, the physical reality shifts in order to match that vibrational frequency. Kind of like if you start reading a book about, beekeeping, and then you're sitting on the bus and somebody's like, oh, I just met this cool beekeeper. And you're like, oh, I'm reading a book on beekeeping. And then you find out you both love honey. And, you have this whole discussion. Well, that's kind of your drawing, because that's where you're vibrating at on the bee vibe, it's fascinating when that happens.
Well, I just want to bring up a point where you're saying that you shift your reality. So are you really shifting your reality? Or are you shifting into a new reality?
And now this is a discussion we have had
Yeah.
and love to have. And we will. It's amazing because that's part of it too. Is it that you're shifting your own reality, or are you shifting into a reality where that's what the expression is that's comfortable?
So somebody I love to listen to because he just brings forth fascinating information is Daryl Anka when he channels Bashar.
Love him.
I just love the way his presentation is, and the information is I really resonate with it. And so one of his principles that I first heard that way is when he talks about parallel realities and he talks about reality itself, and how at every instant in time, whether you're we have the illusion of moving through space, but that illusion of moving through space is actually a snapshot in space and time where each instant of being different from the next is a new parallel reality. And that's how and what I was talking about before, of every instant and snapshot in time and space is a new nexus point from which an infinite number of other possibilities occur. Well, when you look at it that way, that's exactly how that can be so, is that the reality is different from one to the next. And so you can have these simultaneous realities where the hand is way over to the left and the hand is way over to the right at the same time, because everything is happening simultaneously, concurrently. And this is sometimes when people shift their vibration, they don't even realize it. And I think there's a number of factors that go into it, from the Earth's grid, where you have the ley lines of the Earth, and there's little vortexes, magnetic lines on the Earth, and where there's crossover points, sometimes anomalies occur, especially when you can think about the nature of the scalar frequencies from one to the next, and how the magnetic alteration might shift those scalar frequencies in some way. So it creates certain anomalies where some people have seen things like a building appear or disappear. And I think they had a really good episode of Coast to Coast one time on anomalies like that.
There's even a vortex in Southern Oregon that when you're within it, it's in Gold Hill. And when you're in the vortex, they've measured it and it's shaped like a bubble. And, the half of the bubble is above ground and half goes below ground. And it warps how things, what plumb is. Plumb becomes 33 degrees of an angle, where instead of hanging at a 90-degree angle, everything hangs at like this 33-degree angle off of plumb. And things distort in shape and size depending on where you're standing in the bubble. It's fascinating.
Yeah, there's another one, I think, in Rome or...
They're kind of all over, really. I mean, and this one in Southern Oregon is not very big. If I recall correctly, it's only a few hundred feet across in diameter. But they theorize that the Bermuda Triangle is a vortex, and I mean, there's many of them around.
Yeah, the gravity itself within those spaces is altered. By up to 3%. I think, which is significant. And so things with wheels, anything with wheels in this one spot I was reading about will actually roll uphill.
Fascinating.
There was a great article that I read about. It was called "Scientists Prove DNA Can Be Reprogrammed by Words and Frequencies," and it was written by the Collective Education. And one of the things that they cite is some research done in Russia, and they talked about how when that DNA does interesting things in a vacuum, they say, and that it actually produces magnetized wormholes inside of a vacuum, which is fascinating to me. And they talked about how that bits of DNA attract information to them and then translate that information into the physical world. And when I start thinking about energetic work on DNA, I'm looking at it and I do see bits of debris collected on it from trauma or from different experiences that people have had that may or may not be in this personal expression, but may be linked to another expression that they have. And that's when we start talking about parallel realities and parallel expressions and parallel dimensions, and how do we travel between them?
Yeah. There's a lot happening simultaneously, and there's a lot that you can a lot of people will think about past lives and like, oh, I'm getting into past life. Well, again, that goes into the nature of reality and like what's actually occurring in past and future. Like, well, time they've discovered is more spherical than it is linear. It's the illusion that we have that makes it linear. Our perception makes it linear. And so all these things happen concurrently. So you can think of everything happening now. And when you're looking at past lives or even alternate lives, see, it kind of gets a little convoluted when you go into the large scale dynamics of it, because on one hand, you've got alternate versions of yourself on different timelines. And then on the other hand, you've got, from a soul dynamics perspective, your soul incarnating into different bodies simultaneously. So you've got parallel lives, you've got past lives, future lives, and all happening now. But our perception is so limited on a human scale that we don't allow ourselves to dive in or experience or see any of these things. Even healers usually, because of the way our human mind works, we only limit ourselves to a very, very narrow band so that we can focus ourselves into this reality. If we were able to perceive everything at once, just with the consciousness that we have currently, we'd be overwhelmed. We wouldn't be able to function.
We don't have the ability to process that volume of information in the physical form.
No.
It just doesn't, the circuitry is not there.
Not currently.
No.
Well, and that's another part of this is, what are the things that we can think about in the human capacity that do affect us on this physical reality right now? Well, we all have DNA. So number one, obviously that does affect us. We talk about environmental changes to DNA. We talk about things that cause cancers that are in our environment that alter, like we talk about Fukushima, altering the DNA structure, the cellular structure. So what are things that we can do, to help protect our DNA? Well, number one is having a really high vibration. When you shift your own reality and you start doing a lot of your own healing work, I personally believe that shifts your DNA automatically. That your DNA is meant to be triggered when certain vibrations that you hold become more active in your daily life. So we talk about there are certain things we can't understand as human beings. Well, each of us have created a certain reality for ourselves. We are more sensitive in some regards to energy. So we try to explain ourselves to people who don't have this experience, and it sounds very foreign to them. And then we think about, okay, well, what if you were to be dropped into my body right at this minute with all the things that I sense about reality? Their minds would probably be blown. If you started feeling all the things that I feel all the time, well, there was a reason at one point in my life I couldn't leave my house because I was feeling everything on 1,000% all the time. And I have since learned to decipher that, translate it, and become better adept at reading energy and knowing when things are mine, when they're not mine, things like that. But there's the shift that's happening right now where more people are realizing that DNA does matter, that I should protect myself from things that are going to cause my DNA to shift in a negative way, like
organic foods.
Right, organic foods, GMO foods, things that we don't really understand how it's going to affect our DNA. The other part of this that I always love to talk about is the ancestral part of it. On a human level, we know who our ancestors are. We know some of us maybe 1, 2, 3 generations, but we each carry 7 generations of DNA within us from our ancestors.
I've heard 14, actually.
Right.
Just depending on what you're looking at.
Right, exactly. So we're carrying a lot of DNA from people who are related to us but aren't us. So how much of that DNA and how much of that patterning and programming still affects us in this present time?
That actually brings to mind, I was in a session working with this woman who is a master healer, and we were working on that the rape wound, basically. And she asked me, she said, you can really hold a lot of energy after we'd completed working on her. And she said, do you think that we could carry this out and take this work to my bloodline? And I was like, far out. I was training and I thought, that's far out. Yeah. Like, how do we know who that is? And she goes, we're just going to set the intention. And so she started opening it up, and I felt us going, and she was from, this European country, and we started there, and then really quickly we were in the Middle East, and then it really started to explode and go out from there. And I was like, you're related to a lot of people. And then all of a sudden I was involved in it. And I realized, oh my God, we're related on some level. And she's like, yeah, I thought so. And then it was fascinating just following this bloodline and removing this type of energy, this vibration from that bloodline, from the genetic part of it. It was fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of new science that's come out that correlates to just that, on the importance of DNA and how it carries information from one generation to the next. And one of the most interesting things I think I've seen lately is the nature of consciousness itself and the changes that occur on a genetic level. So one of the things is that phobias are actually woven in genetically into the DNA. We all know not everybody has phobias. Some people have it, some don't. And you can clear phobias. So if phobias can be cleared doing like consciousness work, and phobias also are carried through the genetic line, that tells you that we can consciously change our DNA. Not only with the other experiments that show it explicitly, but this is one experiment that shows it implicitly. So other experiments are like the using frequencies and lasers through, like Pjotr Garjajev, who's changed a salamander or a frog into a salamander using a laser by shining through the two embryos on an embryonic state, the laser through the salamander into the frog, and it changed its entire blueprint, and it grew up into a salamander. I think that was one of the most fascinating experiments I've ever heard, and that's kind of like one of the first things I started reading. And it showed me that DNA itself is pliable. And then there's been cases of people who've had spontaneous development of immunities to HIV in certain circles. And so we once thought the DNA is this thing that couldn't be changed and couldn't be altered. And this hardwired evolution thing that occurred on a very slow, steady pace. But it's something that can be shifted within one lifetime. And whole generations and populations can shift their DNA in a very short amount of time too. There was another study that showed these different lizards on this island where they were very sparse vegetation and they were carnivorous. And some group of scientists took them and put them on the mainland a little bit away, where they had no way they can get from the island to the mainland. But when they put them over there and they were monitoring these lizards, within 30 years, their whole jaw structure changed, their whole diet changed, and they became herbivores. They no longer hunted as their main source of food, but they started eating plant-based food, and they had to get different jaw structures to accommodate for chewing and grinding the plant material. And so there we have a whole generation that changed its genetic structure within a very short time.
Fascinating.
The ability to adapt and compensate. We talk about the body being sort of a fixed object, but the body really is this very fluid thing. And so even to the very structure of it, the DNA of it, we talk about people regrowing organs spontaneously, or as children having their tonsils out or having an appendix removed. And then later on in life, oh, you have tonsils again and you have an appendix. Oh, well, why did that happen? Yeah. So, I mean, these are things that have been a relatively, common occurrence, but we have been kind of kept in the dark about how malleable and adaptive the human body can really be.
Yeah, it's actually, my son broke his arm earlier this year. I think he actually broke it on May 5th. I thought that was so funny. May 5th of 2015. It was cracking me up. But anyway, he broke his arm, and I was like, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to heal his arm. It's just, I'm really zealot about it. Like, yes, I'm going to so do it. And I was talking to this other healer, and I was telling him about that. And he said, well, that's going to be a challenge, because you're not just going to be trying to heal his arm against your belief system that a broken arm can actually be healed instantly. You're also working against his belief system. Can his broken arm be healed instantly? Does he believe that that's a possibility? As well as every doctor that sees it, that expects it to still be broken, that will almost recreate their expectations, will also recreate the injury. And then I thought it was fascinating how when we went in and started seeing his surgeon, he was like, he didn't even refer to it as a broken arm. He referred to it as a healing bone, and I loved his approach. It was like, oh, okay, great. And yeah, he healed really fast that way. And it increased exponentially, his healing. He was out of his cast within 6 weeks, and already, working it in MMA again. So when you're talking about healing and shifting frequencies and the beliefs around reality, that's really what healers are butting up against, are the belief structures of their clients, of the people that are around them, the people that hold them in that vibrational expression. And that's one of the big things I think that inspired all of us, is that we wanted to not just, help people. Sure, we can go in and shift your frequency, shift your expression, but we want to teach you how to start shifting the reality you live within, so that the belief structure can actually become more malleable, and then you can shift and see things differently and get exposures to different things.
Definitely. I think we like to call that being awake.
Yes.
Yeah.
The awakened state.
Right. A more awakened state where you realize that the things that you've been taught aren't necessarily the things that are true for you, especially as individuals, and the importance of what you believe. What beliefs, what truths are you holding that are helping to shape and create your reality? Are they self-fulfilling prophecies? Mm-hmm. Are they, a negative thought pattern that you've had for years that, oh, this is just never going to happen. This is never going to happen. And guess what? It never happens. Mm-hmm. Wow. It's interesting how those beliefs do create a pattern where that's how reality plays out. Yeah. And sometimes when you have the ability to step outside of that and observe, then you can see, oh, well, if I just shift just slightly right here, oh, hey, I don't have to believe that things are not always going to happen or always going to be this way. That there is a chance that something could shift, something could change, and oh, hey, look, there's an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And if I was so focused on it not being, again, and that's what you were talking about earlier, the lack and abundance. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about where we lack and we focus on where we lack, we miss the opportunities for abundance all the time.
For sure.
I think that's one of the most fundamental things on shifting the way you experience life, is to examine your own consciousness. So many people take for granted the way they experience the world. They look around them and they just start automatically adhering to the consensus that exists out there and saying, this is the way things are. Well, they said it was like this, so this is the way things are. And so many times people give their power over to authority in a way that really limits their experience. I remember reading a case of a boy who had gone to see the ophthalmologist, and he could hear his parents talking to the doctor in the next room. And he was like, I'm blown away. I can't explain this. I don't know what's going on. He shouldn't be able to see. He should be blind right now. He shouldn't be able to see. His eyes aren't even connected to his brain. He shouldn't be able to see. Well, instantly that boy went blind. Well, before that, he could see perfectly. So he had no awareness of the limitations that existed in his body. He just assumed that he could see like everybody else. When he heard the authority prescribe the symptom that he should be blind, he instantly agreed to it. And there's so many cases like that where people's experience of reality suddenly shifted when they heard somebody else became so shocked by their experience of it that, in one hand, we want to make sure that some part of us wants to please others, you know. So there's a whole slew of beliefs that go into any experience like that. And I can remember another experience like that, or another case where, what's that doctor's name?
Joseph.
Not that one, but that's another good one. He was on Oprah. He's
Dr. Oz?
No.
He's
an Indian guy. He wrote a couple books.
Deepak Chopra?
No,
I love Deepak Chopra.
Mm-hmm. So I remember reading in Deepak's book, one of them, and he was talking about working in the hospital. And he had known this guy for years. When he first got there, he said at the hospital, you're required to take a full chest x-ray and full exam. And he didn't think anything of it. And this guy was a heavy smoker. And so he started having this cough, and he had the cough, I think he said, from when he knew him, but it was there the whole time. Finally, he's someone kept saying, you gotta go get that cough checked out. He's like, oh yeah, I'll do it someday. You gotta go get that cough checked out. Yeah, I'll do it someday. And I think 2 years later, he finally went and got the cough checked out, and they took some x-rays, and they saw this tumor in the x-ray on his lungs. He's like, oh, this tumor is really bad. You've got 2 weeks to live. This tumor, it's past the stage where we could repair it. And so, he said his goodbyes and everything. And 2 weeks later, he died. And Deepak was like, well, I really wonder about this. And he went back to the initial x-ray where this guy first joined the hospital. And he had the same exact tumor. It was the same exact size. It wasn't until he got prescribed the inevitable, quote unquote, fate that he actually died and or had problems because of it.
Mm-hmm. There was another doctor, I will not remember his name right now, but he has been looking at treating cancer in a completely different way. In treating cancer, rather in treating the alkalinity versus the acidity of the environment inside the body. And that, basically his premise is that the more acidic your body is, the more bacteria can grow, which causes inflammation, which is the root of all disease. So he was, what inspired him was he was telling the story about his grandmother. And she was from Russia, and she had this lump on her breast, and it had always been there since he knew her. And she came to America, and when she was in her 60s or 70s, she went to the doctor, and they saw it, and they said, oh, this is breast cancer. We need to remove it right away. And they scared her into agreeing to have this tumor removed that she'd really had her whole life. And so as soon as they cut into it, it spread, and she was dead within a few weeks. And so that really made him say, wait a minute, she had that forever, and in his research, he started to find you could pick anyone up off the street and find cancer within them. Cancer is the normal state of the body reacting to DNA that's no longer reproducing itself appropriately. So it collects it puts it encapsulates it, and sometimes we call those cysts or boils when they come to the surface, but really it's an encapsulated collection of faulty material that the body needs to expel on some way. And when we hold on to it, it forms a tumor inside of us and becomes cancer.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you take the epigenetical approach to DNA through epigenetics, which was the most recent emerging field in biology. You can really see how everything within the field affects the DNA, and the DNA itself is structured like a Mobius coil.
Yeah.
Well, it wraps back around itself, which creates a scalar field. Scalar fields interact with things at distances, without having a direct contact. So, same with the microtubules in the brain. And the heart itself, and the way it's woven, is shaped more or less like a Mobius coil. And so you can look at the correlations and how the whole body is built to interact with its environment. And it's easy to see how our thoughts and our beliefs affect the DNA itself. And not only by all the empirical evidence that we have through experiments, but just at the very structure, at the core of the human being.
It's kind of like when you start those videos that you see where they start at a certain point, like maybe a leaf on the planet, and then they go out and zoom out until you're out in outer space and really far, and you see these galaxy-like organizations, and then it zooms back in and it goes into the leaf again, and then goes down into the molecular structure of the leaf, and again it looks like an echoing of what you saw when you looked at the far zoomed out view. That macro versus micro environments. They're really replicating each other, which brings us back into the whole concept of, everything is connected. We're all so similar. It's all the same. It's these basic structures and frameworks that are repeating over and over and over.
The
and how do you impact it?
The patterning of the universe.
Exactly.
That goes from just about every level you can think of. Just because we can't see it on a grander scale doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of makes me wonder when you think about the multiverse and different versions of reality, if the same exact structure exists over there, or because of the different scalar resonance that the field might be built upon, the geometry itself would be shaped a little differently.
Maybe we should shift over to the vibration and check it out.
I think it's a very interesting hypothesis. Certainly, since all possibilities exist, there certainly sounds like there would be a possibility where in another dimension that would be completely accurate.
When you think about the nexus point of all infinite possibilities existing at any given time, I would say it absolutely probably does.
Yeah. I know that for myself, when I first started, well, not first started waking up, but I guess it was, earlier this year in March or February, my view and my understanding of reality really shifted and changed. And I suddenly, when I would start to meditate and look at myself in this, as my singular expression, I started seeing all these parallel expressions and all these other experiences, these other realities that are so similar but just a little bit different. Which also brings into the discussion the concept of when a psychic tells you your future.
Right.
What are they actually telling you? Well, they're really just looking where you're at now on your current strand of expression, and they look forward on that. And they're still only looking based on a series of choices and decisions and experiences, and it's not necessarily the truth.
Well, they're looking at the highest probable outcome given the current timeline that you're existing on and that moment.
A good one.
Is that
a good one?
Hopefully.
Looking for the highest. Sorry.
Oh, maybe not highest and best, but the highest probability. Hopefully it's a good one. Yeah. The thing about that, though, that most people don't realize is because everything is stemming from the point that you're at now. And everything is based on the consciousness that you're experiencing in that moment. Sometimes the awareness of such events changes the behavior that would have brought it out in the first place. So if you think of something as it's inevitable, the psychic says, you're going to be rich and famous, it's inevitable, and you're on this pathway where you're doing all this work, you're putting yourself out there, and you go from place to place trying to get jobs and,
working hard
to get where you're trying to be. And then suddenly someone says, it's inevitable, you're going to get there. And the person stops. Yeah. Like, it's inevitable. I don't have to work that hard. It's going to happen anyways. Boom. They just shifted their reality into a place where they expected it to just drop on their lap, and it's no longer happening because what worked for them, the pathway that was going to get them there, was doing all this work, which was going to string together a series of events that may not been fully aware of at the time, and that sequence of synchronicities that would have brought them to the final outcome no longer is in play.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just reaffirms for the psychic and then that's an invalidation for the psychic, like, oh, it didn't work. And we get all of those kind of problems happening too. And I know,
not to say that every psychic is accurate either.
No.
In any regard.
Right. I think we talked about that too. If there's anybody who's like, oh, I have 100% accuracy, you can tell they're 100% liar.
Yeah. I know you better than you do. And this is what's going to occur.
So I think that's a really important way of looking at, we talk about, future forecasting. Those are
parallel expression looking.
Right. Viewing. Those are highest probabilities. But even as people who do healing work and do sometimes actually get glimpses of the future, we have a duty, a level of ethics, a level of integrity. Most of the work I do is not telling people their futures. It's working on this very much reality of the present. And the future is something that we allow to happen as it happens.
Well, that brings to mind another Bashar comment, or Bashar statement, I guess, where he was talking about, living every moment in that moment to your bliss. Really following your highest, happiest most truest state in each moment that you live. And that can only lead you to the path that you really want to be on, that optimum expression.
Exactly, because sometimes people kind of force themselves through a state, and it's really like they feel off about it, but then they like get drawn into something like a sense of obligation, and the sense of obligation then goes down this pathway. And then sometimes I think, oh well, I knew I shouldn't have done that. But if you're living your bliss, like what you get most drawn to in the time, then you're gonna end up in the right place. I think. What was I going to say? There's something that was brought up a little bit ago. I was going to mention.
Oh, that's what a pen and paper's for.
I have it here in front of me.
And we talk about future forecasting and.
Well, I know for myself, as I mentioned earlier, when I started suddenly seeing all of these different expressions, and I got really confused because I'd see these relationships that I had with people in my current life. And then I'd see all the other relationships and all the other possibilities. And I'd be like, wait, are you showing me this because I'm supposed to be shifting to this other? No, that's all just your desires leading you around.
Right. The search for wholeness continues.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it does help shift you into this next step where you can then be exposed to new things to then get new inspiration. Brandon found it.
Yeah, I did find it. I don't know how it actually plays into what you were just saying. I had the thought at the time, but it was relevant to future forecasting and a person's conscious awakening, and how it manifests into reality. And what I was going to mention is that the more a person consciously awakens, the more they unravel these false belief systems, how incredibly fast their thoughts begin to manifest because you have less debris in the way.
Yeah.
And you can think about this on a pure physics level when you have opposing frequencies occurring in one body, they tend to cancel each other out. And so you can look at the debris a person has as their disconnection from source. And the less debris they have, the less cancellations that occur, which is why the more a person evolves on their spiritual path, the more their thoughts manifest instantly, which you can also kind of correlate to why there's so much drastic change right now on the earth.
For sure.
Everything has been steady for a certain amount of time and not much has changed. And it was easy to predict major events. There was a lot more accuracy as far as psychics go because there was more, I guess, constant vibration at a certain level, more people asleep, so nothing really was changing. Everything was on a set path. And the more people begin to awaken, the more they have their individual expressions occur, the more their thoughts begin to manifest. And you see these varying alterations in the reality itself because of that.
Well, and you can really, I think, correlate that to how connected have we been as people. Up until this last, 20 years, we were pretty isolated. I mean, if you really wanted to talk to somebody, it was a long distance phone call. Well, that's only been like the last, 50 or 60 years. And if then before that, it was like weeks long for, mailings to make it over the ocean in a boat or on a camel's back across the desert, whatever. So now that we're so connected and information is so available, and I can, Hannaneel can be in Vancouver and I can be in Portland, and we can have instant communication with each other. Right. We can instantly affect each other.
Or we can talk to people across the world.
Exactly.
Instantly.
Instantly. People we never would have otherwise met, and have real intimate conversations and
sharing of ideas.
Of two human beings who are now going to share energy with each other and sharing who they are to create a level of connection that never would have otherwise occurred during another time frame. And I think you bring up a really great point, because we have to talk about the constant. One of the things that is constant about energy is expansion and contraction. All energy exists that ever existed. And it's expanding and contracting at varying states depending on where the energy is at, what it's being observed, who it's being observed by. So as far as the Earth is concerned in the universe, a lot of what we've been going through is a huge contraction. And so now we're part of this much bigger expansion than anyone on the planet has experienced in a very long time. Yeah. So the shifting that's happening not only on a planetary level, on a universe level, but also that affects us here on a very human level. Mm-hmm. And the fact that just recently we're able to see photographs from Pluto.
Woo!
That was so cool.
So cool.
That was just
so
amazing,
excited by that.
To be able to have sent out a probe that, took over a decade to get there. Mm-hmm. And now we're able to see these photographs. And we talk about the light that we see from stars, the light that we see from the sun, and how quickly it travels to our planet and it affects our reality.
Right. How quick solar storms hit us.
Right. Mm-hmm. Solar flares, things like that. And do they affect humans? We talk about the moon and the tides and things like that. And anybody who's ever worked in a medical facility at any kind, I used to work in the veterinary field, and I can tell you for sure that full moons do bring out crazy people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And people are affected.
Crazy.
Yeah, people are definitely affected by that moon energy for sure. Which, speaking of, we have a blue moon coming up. So.
Well, speaking of the moon and the full moon, I mean, there's when you take courses on remote viewing, some of the things that they've noticed when they've did all of their experiments is that the electromagnetic spectrum of the Earth changes during these full moons and stuff, and their level of accuracy actually increased during these times because the field itself shifted
and became stronger.
Exactly.
Interesting, because that's part of how the ancients used to do a lot of their mystical sacred work was during the full moons.
And why they tracked so much of what was happening around them in this.
Makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Exactly. They were onto something.
But I think that's the really wonderful part of what we get to do now is we get to take a lot of that old ancient wisdom and knowledge and actually put it with, electromagnetic recordings and say, oh, there is a correlation here that we can actually scientifically prove that these people weren't just, blowing steam anywhere. They actually had some knowledge as far as how things were working. They couldn't maybe explain it as electromagnetic fields, but they really knew that something was going on, which is a lot of our experience too. Like, I can't tell you what's happening, but I can tell you something's happening.
Exactly.
There's a great documentary called The Pyramid Code, where the documentary maker who made it, she went to Egypt, and one of the things she was theorizing is that all of these great structures are actually built on limestone aquifers by water sources. And as water flows through a limestone aquifer, it generates electricity. And so she said she looks at the Great Pyramid, and it's built that way, and it has this granite-lined chamber in the center of the pyramid. And they know that granite can absorb energy and hold it like a battery and release it over a period of time. And they call it a living stone. This chamber is totally inaccessible. It's not the king's chamber. There's no sarcophagus in it or anything. And so, I was talking with somebody and they were saying, well, what would they even use the electricity for? Why are they harnessing it? Well, they have in some of the priest ruins and temples, they have hieroglyphs of them holding light bulbs with big long coils going off of them. And they know that there's no smoke damage or smoke residue left from burning torches except for more recent torch burnings in any of those pyramid structures. So we know that they had an understanding way back when that we can't even conceive of. The Baghdad battery and all sorts of other resources that we now are finding, or materials that we're finding in the bottom of the ocean in different sunken cities that haven't been raided.
You bring up a good point. There's also to correlate with that, there's also the evidence of the Sphinx being emerged in water.
Yeah.
And over several thousand years.
Yes.
It was for the most part emerged in water during that time. So they were definitely doing something with that. But what?
What? Yeah, they said it was fast. It's fascinating. Michael Tellinger also discusses a lot of that kind of stuff and how just getting people to let's look at this information that we've been collecting, over all this time, and let's take away the assumptions based on what our understanding was at that point, and look at it fresh again and see what it really has to offer. So we're pretty much getting to the end of the show, and one of the things that we wanted to make sure was we had mentioned in our first episode that we were going to set things up so that we could receive questions and comments and understandings from all of you. So you can feel free to contact us. Our email address is TheCrystalCocoon@gmail.com, and we also really wanted to thank our sound guy.
Woot woot!
Eric Klein, who just rocks. We love that dude.
He makes us sound amazing.
I know, Eric. Can you just follow me around? Sounds so much better that way.
So yes, big shout out to him. Thank you again so much for all of your hard work and dedication and helping us do this, which is so much fun for all of us. This is like a dream come true for where we're going. So it's nice to have other people who are supportive, and we can further support them too.
Absolutely. Thank you, the man that made all this possible.
Kicked our butts and said, just start recording, guys. So, next week we'll be back again with some more discussions. We'll probably continue our discussion of the nature of reality and bring it.
I do think we have an episode 2 on that.
Yeah, for sure. That it's such a big topic.
Right. And if there are specific topics that you have questions about, feel free to email